Now here's what would work. And I was asked by an immigration open borders activist a couple of weeks ago how I would get all of the illegals here in the state of Iowa to leave. Well, I said, if I wanted to do that, I'd just put up some signs. Well, what would the sign say? I said, I'd put them on the end of the highway on western part of the interstate system, and I put them on the eastern side of the state, right there in the interstate system, and in the north on the Minnesota border, and on the south Kansas and Missouri border. And I would just say this: as of this date, whenever we decide to do this, as of this date, this is a totally arbitrary number, 30 to 60 days from now, anyone who is in the state of Iowa that is not here legally and cannot demonstrate their legal status to the satisfaction of the local and state authorities here in the state of Iowa become property of the state of Iowa. So if you are here without our permission, and we've given you 2 months to leave, and you're still here, and we find that you're still here after we've given you the deadline to leave, then you become the property of the state of Iowa. And we have a job for you, and we start using compelled labor. The people who are here illegally would therefore be owned by the state and become an asset of the state rather than a liability, and we start inventing jobs for them to do. We say, hey, we're not going to make Mexico pay for the wall. We're going to invite, though, illegal Mexicans and illegal aliens to build it. We will compel your labor. You would belong to these United States. You show up without an invitation, you get to be an asset. This is Fred. Good morning, Fred.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Your idea is clever on the face, but it sounds an awful lot like slavery. I think it go over like a lead balloon. So
no, you just read the Constitution, Fred. What does the Constitution say about slavery?
Well, didn't we fix that in about 1865?
Yeah, we sure did, and I'm willing to live with their fix. What does the 13th Amendment say?
Well, I don't have my Constitution in front of me, and like I say, it sounds like a clever idea, and maybe you could make it, put it in action, but I think the fallout would be so significant. I think
what would be the nature of the fallout?
Well, I think everybody would believe it sounds like slavery.
Well, what's wrong with slavery?
Well, we know what's wrong with slavery.
Apparently we don't.
He spoke about that exception clause in this clip. You heard it with your own ears. He said, what does it say about slavery? Well, I'm perfectly fine with how it's written. And what he was perfectly fine with was having that exception clause in the 13th Amendment, which allows anybody convicted of a crime to be a slave, to be property of the state. Now, we don't have slavery today like we had in 1865, where people are out on plantations, although there are people on plantations, like in Angola prison in Louisiana. We don't see that on a regular basis, though. Normally, when we're talking about slavery and human trafficking, we mean that there is an incentive to put young people, old people, all people into prisons for profit. Here in South Carolina, in order to incarcerate one teenager your age, someone your age, is $160,000 a year. We pay that to a company called CEC, Community Education Center, and it's located right here in South Carolina. I've been to the facility and talked to the kids myself there and explained to them the same thing I'm going to try to explain to you today, in order for you to stay free and alive. Because for me, that's the most important thing I can accomplish today, is to give you the tools you need to avoid being incarcerated at some time in your life. You know, there's cities like in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where more than 1 out of every 2 black men are expected to spend time in prison before they are 30 years old. Does anybody here want to go to prison? Anybody? I didn't think so. I feel the same way. But the odds are that some of you will end up there. So my goal today is, A, to give you the tools, as I said, to try to avoid those pitfalls called the school to prison pipeline, to also recognize that this system is in play right now, called slavery and human trafficking, and to inspire you, if I can, at some point, to be able to use your own voice and your own talents and your own skills in order to speak against this, or fight against it in any way that you can. Sometimes just by keeping yourself free is the best way to fight against it. That's one less person that we have in these prisons and in these jails. There are incentives to put you there, and we don't want to see you go into those places. I will read just a couple of these reports that have come out about the school to prison pipeline. For instance, 40% of students expelled from U.S. schools each year are black. 40% are black. Now, we only make up 13% of the population, but 40% of the students who are expelled are black. 70% of students involved in school arrests or referred to law enforcement are black and Latino. So 70% of the students who end up being referred to these police for in-school infractions are black or Hispanic. 3.5 times, it says black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than whites. This comes from the Color of Mass Incarceration, by the way, which is the Equal Justice Initiative. And what it's pointing out is that there is a system of racism involved in our nation, especially in the southern states where we have experienced it to a very large degree, even to this day. The next one, and I'm not going to read them all, but I just want to read a few. Black and Latino students are twice as likely to not graduate high school as whites. Twice as likely. Yes. 68% of all males in state and federal prisons do not have a high school diploma. 68%. See, it's percentages that are the problem. One of the best ways that you can avoid this pitfall of ending up in a prison system is by finishing your education. By finishing your education. The more you know, the better prepared you are for the future. You don't want to be a part of this 68% who don't have high school diplomas that are in prison. You want to avoid these pitfalls because, you know, prison changes your life forever. Not only do you have to deal with the incarceration, but after you get out, they have these things called collateral consequences where you can't vote. It's hard for you to get a job. It's hard for you to get assistance. People look at you differently. They treat you differently. They act differently towards you. So you want to avoid all of those things, and education is the best way to do that. Frederick Douglass. Everybody here know Frederick Douglass? Contrary to what Trump says, he's not alive anymore. I just want you to know that he's not alive. But Frederick Douglass said that education makes a man or woman unfit to be a slave. So you're too smart for that. And I believe that you are some of the brightest and best we have in our country right here today. And I think that you can change the future. So what I would like to do is open up a line of communication.
Yes, sir. That's amazing.
Why do you think he follows you? Why is he a fan of yours? Where
I thought they were talking to me. I think the video is playing automatically.
I say probably because some of the dunks he's seen on social.
There you go. All right. I would like to open up some communication. I know I've said some things that have already shocked you, particularly when you said, free the slaves. And I'm like, no, that's not what happened. So I know you probably have questions. So I would like to open up the lines of communications. If anybody has any questions, just raise your hand. Any questions at all? Yes, sir.
So, can you elaborate on when you said modern slavery
Well, modern slavery means that in this day and age, we have criminalized cultures, lifestyles, and people. For instance, there's, I believe it's Spartanburg, South Carolina, where there's a law, I think it's Spartanburg, but don't quote me, I know it's in South Carolina, where there's a law about sagging pants. Sagging pants, if you have your pants 4 inches below your waistline, you are liable to be subject to a $500 fine or 6 months in jail. So for the clothing you wear in a particular city, you can go to jail or prison. Now, what happens to you once you're in these jails and prisons? Well, as I said earlier, to incarcerate one teenager in South Carolina through CEC is $160,000 a year. So there's an incentive for these facilities to want you to come in because you create jobs. You know how many people could get a job up $160,000 a year? They're paying for your council worker, they're paying for your guards, they're paying for your food, they're paying for your insurance. They're paying for all of these things which don't amount to $160,000. It's a very much for-profit prison system. Now, when I say for-profit prison system, what I mean that is if I wanted to buy stocks in human beings today, if I wanted to buy people, I could go online right now and purchase stocks in companies like the GO Group or Core Civic, which are the top 2 private prison companies in the world. And when I purchase those stocks in these prison companies, I'm not purchasing buildings, I'm not purchasing services. I am purchasing the fact that those prisons will be filled with people just like you. And they make a lot of money. A lot of money. As a matter of fact, our estimates, and this may be like just too many zeros to even imagine, but our estimates is that the prison system in the United States alone is worth $500 billion a year. Specifically when you start talking about charging $160,000 a year for children. And that's not the lowest amount. In New York State, and I'm a northerner who was transplanted to the South, in New York State, it's $353,000 a year to incarcerate a young person just like you. $353,000 a year. Now, I don't make $353,000 a year. I have never made $353,000 a year, but I can tell you this, if you gave me, as a parent, just 1 year's worth of incarceration funds, $353,000, you would never have seen any of my children. They would have went to college, they would have had houses, they would have had everything that would have made their life so much better and easier for them to avoid the pitfalls. And I'm sure if I gave any one of you $353,000, odds are you would never see the inside of a prison cell. Am I right? Right. Exactly. You would have a lot to do with that $353,000. You know how much they pay to educate someone around your age? It's roughly about $9,000 a year. So you would pay $9,000 a year to get you an education and $300,000 a year to put you in prison. Now, any more questions? Yes. What she's talking about is 2 questions. One, how do we end, what can we as individuals do? What can you do to help end this system? And 2, the names of companies that are tied into the system. When she mentioned the names of companies, what she means is that there's this prison slave labor issue that is still going on. In California, they have over 70 factories built into the prisons themselves. Here in South Carolina, they have work camps. At one point, has anybody ever heard of Victoria's Secret? Victoria's Secret underwear, right? It's cool, right? You got that? You know, here in South Carolina, the prisoners were making it for 28 cents an hour. So you had prisoners making Victoria's Secret, working for 28 cents an hour, and then selling it on the open market. Anybody ever heard of Idaho potatoes? Yeah, Idaho potatoes, right? We be making some french fries with them Idaho potatoes, mashed potatoes, you name it. We be cooking them up. But from the planting stage of putting the seeds in to the process of growing them, to the process of putting them in the bags and shipping them out across the country is all done by prisoners making pennies on the dollars. So we are interacting and participating with and supporting our own slavery when we purchase things like this, when we interact with these companies. For instance, on the way here, my wife and I, we were like hungry. I'm still hungry. You might hear my stomach on the microphone. I don't know if it'll be me or the stomach, but you can figure it out one way or another. In any case, we were really hungry and we wanted to eat. So we were like, McDonald's is right there. Right there. You guys like McDonald's? McDonald's is awesome, right? Yeah. I mean, who doesn't love those hash browns in the morning? And the French fries, right? And the apple pies, man. But you know what? I can't eat McDonald's anymore because I found out that McDonald's uses prison slave labor. You know, the cups that you put the French fries in, those uniforms that the McDonald's employees wear, are made by prisoners in Alabama. Yes, and they're working for free or next to nothing. You see how slavery works? We don't know it's made by people who are incarcerated, and they don't tell us it's made by people who are incarcerated. And so we go out and we spend our money and we support a system that is looking to put someone just like you into a cell so you can make McDonald's uniforms too. Another company or several companies that you might be aware of sound pretty famous companies, and when you hear these names, you're like, wow, are they really using slave labor? And the answer is yes. That would be Burger King, McDonald's, Wendy's, Starbucks, Whole Foods, Walmart. Many of these companies have been using what they are now calling insourcing. That is their word for it, insourcing. And what they mean by insourcing as opposed to outsourcing is during, I guess, the 70s and the 80s and 90s when all the jobs left America and went to other countries where they would do it for a lot cheaper, that was called outsourcing. Well, now they're bringing the jobs back, but they're putting them inside of the prisons, and that's called insourcing. So that's how insourcing works in this country. I was also telling Ms. Dawson just recently, a little while ago, how I had to be real careful about the phone companies that I use. Like, you would be surprised what services are provided in prisons. AT&T, everybody's heard of AT&T, right? AT&T has call centers inside the prisons. So when you pick up your phone and you call for some help on AT&T, it's very likely that you may be talking to someone who is doing 30 to life and working for about 80 cents an hour through AT&T. These are all exploitative companies. They just exploit your labor for free. They exploit your freedom. They take it, they keep it, they sell it, they buy it, they rent it. And as I mentioned earlier today, we, right now, and this is so important that you understand how deep this is. Right now, we live in a country that has the largest prison population that has ever been seen on planet Earth. Isn't that just crazy? Like, they say that 1 in 100 American citizens serve time in jail. 1 in 100. But in certain communities, it's a lot more than that. And I do this experiment often when I go to different places, and it's a matter of raising your hand. So I'm going to ask a question, and if that is the case, just raise your hand. Do you have somebody in your family who is currently incarcerated? That is so much more than 1 in 100, isn't it? That's a lot more than 1 in 100. Thank you for letting me know that. I just want to point that out to you, that in certain communities we have to deal with things that other communities don't have to deal with. If, for instance, when it comes to police, and I know police are going to get mad at me when I say this, but I call them slave catchers. I do, because that's what they're doing, whether they want to or not. There are incentives for them to arrest more people. They have to enforce the law. So if the law says you're not supposed to be having sagging pants 4 inches below your belt, then guess what the officer's job is? To arrest you for doing that. They can't protest it. If you're a policeman, you can't say, you know what, I don't like that particular law. I'm not going to arrest anybody over it. I mean, you could do that, but guess what would happen to you? You would lose your job, right? So it puts our police in a position of a slave catcher, whether they want to be or not. And in certain areas, you'll see that police tend to be in certain environments and communities more than other environments and communities. Here in South Carolina, people of color, black people in particular, make up about 24% of the population. But when it comes to the prisons, for every 1 white person that's being arrested, there are 5 black people. For every 1, there are 5. But we only make up 24% of the population. 1 in 8 men that are in jails right now are in there for something called child support. I know you've heard of that, right? You probably heard of that, right? The child support law. You guys remember? You remember Walter? Lord? I thought Jesus was coming for a minute there. Wow. But anyway, you heard of Walter Scott, right? You remember Walter Scott, the guy that was shot in the back by the cops when he was running? Well, he was running because he didn't want to go to jail for child support. And that's what, he had a warrant out on him about child support. So he was like, you know, I would rather die than spend my life in prison over something like this. And that's ultimately what happened to him. So hopefully that explained how modern day slavery works. And when I say human trafficking, I want to explain that briefly too, so you understand how human trafficking works. Yeah. Does anybody know what human trafficking is?
Human trafficking is when people smuggle illegal.
Yes.
And they use them to make profit.
Well, human trafficking is when you smuggle people across borders, state lines, national lines, and things like that illegally, but it's also done legally too. For instance, in the state of Arizona, right now, there is a prison called Eloy. And Eloy only houses Hawaiians. Now, Hawaii and Arizona are not next to each other. Hawaii is an island in the Pacific. So if you commit a crime in Hawaii, they will put you on a boat or a plane, which we pay for, and then send you to Arizona to put you in a prison in Arizona. You didn't commit a crime in Arizona. What are you doing in Arizona? That's human trafficking. The same thing applies to places like Vermont. Vermont right now has contracts with prisons in Michigan. Vermont and Michigan are not right next to each other. So if you commit a crime in Vermont, and the prison company in Michigan has beds to fill because of their contract, they will take you from Vermont and put you into a prison in Michigan. And you can imagine what that does to the families. Like, how can you visit your family members or anything like that? I had a son who just recently got out of prison, just recently. And for 14 years, he was locked in these prison cells. And he was subject to this moving around from state to state in order to fill prison beds. So that's how modern day slavery and human trafficking works in the United States of America today. It's not illegal. It's all legal. It's in your Constitution, where it says except for prisoners duly convicted. And it's also practiced in fact by the prison companies. Now what can you do, and what are we doing to change this? Because I know y'all are like, man, first of all, I'm tired. It's in the morning. I see a few people falling asleep on me. I hope I'm not boring you too much to death. But what can I do to make a difference? Well, what we're doing is we're leading a movement to abolish the exception clause from the 13th Amendment. We're marching on Washington on August 19th. It's called the Millions for Prisoners March on Washington. We'll be coming with senators and congressmen and policemen and probation officers and people all in the system who feel the system is wrong and have decided that the best way to start to end this is to do what our ancestors tried to do. Our ancestors' goal was to end slavery and racism, discriminatory racism, right? But they didn't finish the task because the Constitution had an exception clause. So we need to finish that task in this generation so that slavery is no longer legal. And we'll be marching on Washington demanding congressional hearings on the exception clause of the 13th Amendment and a constitutional convention in order to remove that exception clause from the 13th Amendment. So we will no longer be hunting human beings, men, women, and children, like wild game in the streets to fill these prison beds. We found out recently that there's already a movement being led called the Convention of States. It's another way to take out the exception clause from the 13th Amendment. So we're looking to work with this group from the Convention of States who are using an Article 5 of the Constitution in order to make these changes. And the last time I checked, they needed 34 states. South Carolina has already signed on, by the way. South Carolina is one of the states that have signed on to a convention of states. They need 34 states, and so far they're up to 12. So we expect to get 34 states within a year's time and to change that exception clause. So it simply says, slavery shall be abolished in the United States of America and all of its territories, period. And that's all we ask for. When you do that, you make it illegal for the prison systems that operate in this country to do what they have been doing. No more $353,000 for the arrest of a child. No more $161,000 for a South Carolina teenager to be put into a jail cell where they're treated like trash and subject to all kinds of violations of their personal space and self. I've heard some terrible horror stories. And many of you raised your hands here, so I'm sure you've heard some terrible horror stories from people who have been inside as well. Any other questions? And did I answer that well enough for you, Ms. Dawson?
Yes, sir.
Yes, okay. Any other questions? No? 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 All right, I'm going to tell you what we need more than anything else. We need abolitionists. Do you know what an abolitionist is? Say it out loud so I can hear you.
A person who wants to abolish slavery.
Exactly. A person that wants to abolish slavery. Yes. And that's what I am. That's what my wife is. And there is a movement called the New Abolitionist Movement. And it's just sweeping the whole country and the world. You know, what we've done here in the United States with our prison system has not ended at our borders. It has been adopted across the globe. Right now, in Turkey, they are building 174 new prisons to house 100,000 dissidents. I was recently contacted by some friends in Ghana, Africa. And you know, Ghana was one of the original nations where people were taken from and brought right here to South Carolina. And in Ghana right now, they are dealing with a bigger prison crisis than we are. Their oldest prison in Ghana right now, in their capital, was built to house 600 people. So they have a building built to house 600 people. Inside that building, presently, are 6,000 people. 6,000 in a place built to hold 600. The largest private employer on the entire continent of Africa is a prison company called G4S. That is terrible. It's just terrible. They asked me to come to Ghana to help them to start an abolitionist movement there. And we're in the discussions process about that right now. Because I had to keep in mind, if I go to Ghana, I'm not in America. They will do things in Ghana that you won't get done in America, so to speak, you know. So I'll need to talk to them. Any other questions? Yes? No? All right. I'm not keeping track of time. Has anybody been keeping track of time so I know just how much time I got left?
You got 2 minutes.
You got how much?
About 2 minutes.
About 2 minutes. Okay, I want to do a poem. Is that okay? We need abolitionists more than anything else, and we need you, because you're the future. I mean, today I'm the adult. Tomorrow you're going to be the adult, and you're going to take my place. And when you do, I need you to keep in mind that we need to end slavery, and you're the one that's going to make it happen. Whispers ripple like shadows across peaceful seas, haunting he, she's, and even taunting me's, that what you call peace with the beast will never cease. He deceives us until he sees us release all hope. That's why you should never ever relinquish it, if only for one witness's sake. But he could change all time at the drop of a dime, and oh, what a difference a day makes. Truly, hope may be lost and awaiting patiently to be found anew, but I know hope's cost to sometimes be lost, and you don't have to go seeking hope. If you have a little faith, then in time a little hope will come to pass for you. Hope is the beauty in the eyes of the beholders, and all the hope in the whole wide world can rest on one pair of shoulders. Isn't that what he told us? That if we just focus, we see heirs to his kingdom amidst a legion like locusts. So come dream with me that we might together see the light lifted across the endless waters waves aboard karma-class vessels whose debts have already been paid, like single days and single ways, when every possibility becomes the one called every, on each page and through each age and from every cemetery. Heirs that may vary like the grains of sand through the promised land, through Abraham's ageless hands, with the gift of free will given to every woman, child, and man to just be, to be just, to be blessed or be damned, to fall from grace or be amazed by it, to simply understand that every hoped hero lies near the end of your own hands, waiting for the moment that you might think, dream, act, or plan. What you may do with may not be enough for some, but for change to come, we're really only going to need one friend, one foe, one servant, one master, one love like the kind that comes after yesterday's disaster, one hand hesitantly holding all human hopes up high on one vision, one decision, or one single sign from the sky. So let's give hope another try. Have a little hope. You hold all for yourself. Then give a little hope away to somebody else, because hope is a beautiful thing like love, and you know it's real because it's felt as if from above. It's one of God's grandest gifts and a simple blessing so true that to have hope, to find hope, we only need to find someone just like you. Hope. Please. I'm Max Parthas. You can Google my name.